So I wanted to open with a little conversation on the art of the belch, because I heard that you, up until recently, have been unable to burp for most of your life. So I thought we'd talk about how that's affected your running career and then what's changed for you. Let's talk about burping.
You've done your research, maybe too well. Things you wish you didn't post online. No, I actually am very happy that I posted online because it's actually a weirdly, not really a common thing, but a lot of people kind of go through the same thing I do, which is something called cricopharyngeal dysfunction, which basically means your throat never relaxes to a point where you just don't burp and you've never been able to burp. So in college, that it wasn't really, it's so funny to think about my storyline. My storyline as a burper is, as a kid, I don't really ever remember burping. And I remember my brother like belching the ABCs. My brother was really loud and obnoxious and hilarious. And I was like, oh, that's so gross. Will's belching the ABCs again. Like, I never want to be that kid. And I'm like, did I think that because I couldn't burp? Or did I like trick myself into never wanting to burp? Because then I never really thought about it until you get to college and are in binge drinking situations. And if I had more than one or two beers, I just got really uncomfortable. I would, feel like I had to throw up. Sometimes I would throw up. And then it was also at that time that I realized like my stomach basically, or my throat basically never relaxes. So the only time when it does relax is when you induce like a gag or vomit reflex. So the only time I can ever get air out of my stomach is by sort of gagging or vomiting. And so as a professional ultra runner, what that's basically meant is if I am ever feeling stomach discomfort, I start worrying that I'm going to have to throw up. And the way that I can get around that stomach discomfort is by literally gagging myself mid-race, forcing myself to kind of air burp. And then I just expel this like really nasty sounding belch that makes me feel a lot better. And then I kind of turn my race around and feel quite a bit relieved and improved. And depending on the distance of the event and how hard I'm going, the temperature and sort of my nutrition strategy, that's been something I've always dealt with in any kind of ultra marathon distance.
So we're talking finger down the throat and do
Exactly.
gagging. Oh man, can you imagine?
No, I mean, I do enough puking when I'm running anyways, let alone trying to make that happen. And I guess for you, you're trying not to actually puke. You don't want to just like bring up everything you've just eaten. But yeah, that'd be super uncomfortable if you feel like your stomach's really full of air.
And it's this weird thing because you always get to this balance of like, I know I need to eat more food. But if I eat more food, then I'm going to throw up. But if I don't eat more food, then I'm going to bonk. So, most ultra races I've had this weird like crux. And actually racing Cocodona led me to really understand what was going on a bit more behind the scenes in a way that I'd never had before. Because I just was put in that situation, 10 or 15 times rather than 1 or 3 times like you might usually otherwise experience.
And that's interesting. Is that because you were pushing, because you run things that are a lot longer than Cocodona? Is that just because you were pushing like 10% faster for that period of time versus the FKT efforts? Or?
Exactly. Like an FKT pace, something that's 800 miles or 2,600 miles, or even like, 270 miles. I did the long trail. I didn't have any of those stomach issues and a big, sometimes I'll have a backpack on during those events and my pace is just so much slower, where Cocodona was like the NASCAR of multi-day events for me, where everything else I've done felt like, an all day super sustainable type effort.
Okay, so let's get into it. I just want to very simply ask you, what is it about you, Joe Stringbean McConaughy, that just makes you so good at these adventures and routes, especially the longer they get?
The secret, I also would love, I'll flip this on you, Billy. What makes me get dusted on hill workouts by some of my Brooks teammates? It's this hilarious thing of fitness, which I think is such a fun topic and something that always excites me as a coach, where, there's so many, it's such a multi-layered question that I probably don't totally understand. But I think, where you see a lot of people fail. Well, this is a good story. When I did the PCT, one of the things that made me realize I would do well at the PCT is the guy before me was a Yale high jumper he was a little bit, he didn't treat his like support crew very well, and he would crash and burn daily or at the very least weekly. And so when I looked at hoping to set the, record fastest known time on the Pacific Crest Trail, I was like, well, I think I have a stronger athletic pedigree. I think I have a sense of compassion and sort of gratitude to be out in these spaces and to appreciate these types of adventures. And then I also have this sort of demeanor where I know how to plan and perform in a long haul environment that allows me to do really, really well, where a lot of people get very stressed out or overwhelmed or frustrated by the challenges that you're, bound to experience in something like this.
But all that being said, did you really have any proof of concept going into it? Because this was back in 2014. I forget if it was during college or right after college.
No idea, Billy. Yeah, literally.
Your first major haul is the Pacific Crest Trail.
Just
that runs
casual
from
jaunt,
from Mexico to Canada. Like, how did you think this was possible that you could not only complete it but go after the FKT?
Maybe I'll put extreme optimism on that list of 3 things that I just told you. Yeah, I had no idea what I was doing. One of the kind of my most embarrassing moment. This is one of those things where one of the most cringeworthy moments, public moments, is in the PCT doc. You guys might remember this quote, but I say something along the lines of, "Oh, how do you know I can do it?" Well, in college, we do 6-minute miles for all our easy runs. And if I just manage 8-minute miles while I'm out on the PCT, it's like an easy day, right? Where I'm like, yeah, ask any trail runner to average 8-minute miles and even in a 50 miler, and they'll be like, okay, good luck. So I really had no idea what I was getting into going into the PCT, which probably helped me in some ways, of just not realizing exactly how dumb of a thought it was. But yeah, the PCT was a huge learning experience and definitely something that I look back on and I'm like, wow, there's a reason there's a fair amount of time under that record beneath it. But it was such a foundational experience that then gave me the confidence to do something like this. I think you're going to find it's pretty hard for people to set, now the FKTs are becoming more competitive. I think it's going to be very hard for someone to come in who's not done an multi-day FKT style event and do well at something like the AT or the PCT, or even something like the Arizona Trail.
So I was kind of interested in diving into the mentality switch and going from your 8-minute mile optimistic PCT plan into realizing that some miles are closer to 20 or 30 minutes. You're a fast runner. You've got a 4:12 mile, a 12-hour 100 miler. But how did you make that mentality switch when you got on the PCT and you realized I can't hold 8-minute miles forever? It's kind of a road runner thing, right? To really rely on the pace. And so how did you kind of move away from that to more of an effort and a sustainable way of still having optimism and not getting too hard on yourself when you realize you're just not going to hit these paces that you thought you might do with ease?
Well, I had a great crew. I had a few things working for me. I had a great crew. I had a lot of time under the existing FKT to break it. I broke Heather's record by I think 6.5 days or something. And she did it for the record. She did it self-supported, meaning she carried her own backpack. So actually it wasn't technically Heather's record, but for all intents and purposes, the supported and unsupported, self-supported records were very close to each other. So there was a lot of cushion underneath the record, underneath the existing record. And also I just felt like I was immediately humbled by the trail, I actually started experiencing Achilles tendonitis on day -1. So I was out on my last training run and I was like, my Achilles is kind of bothering me. This feels pretty. And I was like, is it my shoe? And I kept taking my shoe off. And then sure enough, I get out there and, 2 days later, my Achilles looks like a horseshoe. And I had to battle through that through the first 8 or 9 days. And so I really had this extremely high, extremely painful experience that made it much more about effort than about any kind of pace or distance goals. So, I was hitting high 30-mile days. I remember it took me a few days to even hit a 40-mile day. And then I just kind of slowly started ramping up from there and ended up averaging 50-mile days. But that first week, that first 2 weeks was a whole patience. That was always my plan going into it. I was like, don't kill yourself in the first 2 weeks. But I think injuries really made me have to truly live that, and not just like, I'm going to go easy, air quotes, and then, really not. So
like the film alludes to, it's called The Run for Colin, which is your cousin, a 2-year-old who your family lost due to what's a brain cancer?
Yeah, neuroblastoma.
Rather quickly, yeah. And so I'm curious how that factors into your ability to finish in such a amazing time at the time, because generally speaking, based on some of your work, you seem to have a very business, like black and white approach to everything. But with this, you definitely ran for a cause bigger than yourself.
Yeah, which I think is important, right? Because I get this through backpacking too. And I feel like the feeling I most, it's sort of like, in some ways, like my superhero power, right, is experiencing gratitude in some kind of capacity. And running for Colin made it bigger than just a trail record. And to me, it made it matter, right? Like ultra running, if you ask anybody who's like married or in a relationship or just like has social relationships, like ultra running is like one of the most selfish things in the world, right? And doing a multi-day ultra run is an extension of that, right? So doing it in honor of somebody and in memory of somebody, I think allows me to really, one, sort of justify my time out there, because I'm like, am I really going to go for over 50 days on this kind of like wild adventure I've always really wanted to do? And then also during it, it's very empowering because, it makes me rethink my relationship with my family, with Colin, with his parents, with, my immediate family, and kind of have that sense of gratitude and perspective that I think is very quickly lost when you're, really uncomfortable on day 4 from, Achilles tendonitis. You have that sense of like, wow, this is like, there's a lot more than just my Achilles tendonitis out in the world. And it's really important. And to me, it's been something I'm very grateful for, that's always been incorporated in some kind of capacity to a lot of these efforts I've done.
So I think one of the more impressive things, probably the most impressive thing on your resume, is the Appalachian Trail FKT, which not only did you set the overall time, but you did it self-supported. Whereas I was watching Carl Meltzer's documentary or some of his postscript on the whole experience. And he said about 80% of that was thanks in part to his crew. And you did it self-supported. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, it was, I would agree with you, where it just felt like, that's when a lot of different things came into focus. And it's a very solitary experience in some ways, but there's still a lot of kind of community ingrained into it, right? Like my partner was integral in helping me plan for it and execute it and make sure resupply boxes got to where they were supposed to go. I made it sort of like an effort to stop and talk to trail hikers and be part of the trail running community, through hiking community. To me, it's like, I'm a through hiker. I'm not like this FKT setter. So for me, it was really important to kind of meet people along the way and to develop and foster some of these relationships that, are sort of integral to the Appalachian Trail experience to begin with. And on top of that, I became good friends with Heather Anderson, who was one of my first, big people to really inspire me to do FKTs. And in talking with her, she helped make me feel like, yeah, this is doable. She had done the AT herself. So I got this sense of, confidence in my ability to plan and to go after the AT. And I thought it was super fun to go after the AT FKT self-supported for a supported record, which is just something that spices it up and drives me. Like, I'm a very mostly an internally motivated person, but like that concept to me is just like really, really fun and challenging and adds a little extra spice on it.
Can you tell us some of the nuances of that actual route? Because there's a lot of people who are from the West Coast, Colorado, who probably never set foot on it. It is a whole different kind of beast, right? Versus a PCT or AZT. Yeah,
you have like statistically, you have less miles, but you have more feet per mile of elevation gain. And that's where the magic really is. So I think you have somewhere around like 210 feet per mile, where the PCT has like around 170, 180 feet per mile. And it's just totally different. You get a lot more moisture. I remember one of my biggest mistakes, day one, I get into my camp and I'm like, oh man, I've sweated through my shirt and then some, and I hung it on a branch. And I got up the next morning and it was just as wet as it was the day before.
Bring it out.
Like, oh, this is going to be like a sweaty, like maybe nasty at times effort. The AT is also, it's definitely more popular. There's a lot more use on it. The trails are older. So there's a lot more root and rock and kind of dirt that has kind of been pushed away. And it's also, the PCT is designed to go from ridge to ridge, where the AT is designed to go from peak to peak. So because the PCT has this ridge to ridge mentality, it's built based on kind of stock animal access, which is around a 12 or 13% max grade, where the AT, they don't really care about your max grade going up Katahdin or Blood Mountain.
It's just get to the top and then get back down again and then do the next one.
Yeah. We're not going to build you a nice switchback to cruise down and feel good, as you float down the trail.
I loved one of my favorite lines from the film, which is, yes, there's another film about this featuring Joe McConaughy, is when you're talking about your through hiking experience. And when you're out there for so many hours, you talk about a sense of stillness that made you really happy. When you're out for 15 hours by yourself running, and that's all you're doing, you go into a kind of meditation. And believe it or not having a phone in front of you, big shocker, allows you to step back and you think about your place in the world and who you are and where you fit in that world. So, I found that particularly poignant. So expand upon that idea. There was no outside stimuli. You didn't rely on any music, podcasts. You were just there alone with your thoughts, occasionally talking to a GoPro.
Pretty much. Yeah. Because, everything was like a management of resources. My mom actually just said that the other day. And I was like, wow, I've never thought about it like that, Mom. That's exactly what it is. It's like a management of resources where everything you have, you're self-reliant on. So that goes all the way down to your battery pack, right? And there were multiple times on the AT where my headlamp died, right? And I'm like, oh, my stupid battery. If only I'd been a little bit smarter about battery usage or about phone usage, then I'd be able to do some of these things. And at the same time, I would like really cherish talking to my partner and kind of checking in with a few friends. And, Dills and I, the guy who helped make the documentary, stayed in touch a bit through it and with all these things. So it's sort of, I don't know, maybe that's like in some ways, like you as a, documentary maker might think of that as like a creative process time where you have so few things that you're really engaged with. There's a lot of things you're worrying about, but there's not a lot you're really engaged with, that there's a lot of extra kind of mental capacity out there. And so while I was, doing the AT, it made it really fun to have my GoPro, to take these really cool kind of long drawn out shots, to talk into the camera, to document sort of what I was doing. It wasn't like that was helping me break the record. I would literally be running, be like, wow, this is a post that my GoPro can hang out on. I'm going to plant it here and then run past my GoPro and then run back and then pick up my GoPro. So some of my favorite footage is the behind the scenes footage that Dills has, which is of me planting a GoPro. It falls for like a minute and I finally get it. And then I go run out and then go run back and then get my GoPro and then keep going. It's like, it's so far away from setting like a world record mindset in times like that. But it's also what, to me, was some of the brilliance and magic and peace that you experience when you're out there, where you have that sense of play and fun and, right side brain type activity.
Yeah, that mental piece is important, or you're just going to start talking to yourself and slowly go crazy, right?
I mean, I did that anyway, but it may be a little more graceful.
Fair. Very fair.
I also like this other notion that you put out there on the film when you talk about people don't do the AT for reasons that aren't intensely personal. They'll get weeded out in the first few days. Can you elaborate on this thought? Yeah,
there's something like, I'm going to botch the stat. Somebody's going to call me out on that, but that's fine. It's something like 50% of AT hikers quit in the first 40 miles. where one of the first major resupplies is. So there's a lot of people, like you'll hear all these stories of like, it's a hike to get to Springer Mountain. And you'll hear like the people who shuttle people to get out there are like, here's my phone number, just in case you don't want to do the AT, you can call me. And more often than you think, that return phone call gets made. And it's also a common joke of AT through hikers is you go to one of the first kind of that quit spot, and there's just this hiker box where literally entire backpacks have been dumped. So brand new, thousands of dollars of equipment, and people just drop it all and get on a plane and leave, right? So, you see all types of people that do the AT. One of my favorite groups there was somebody who was recovering from kind of like a drug addiction, another guy who had gotten a steel plate in his spine, and another guy who I think he lost like over 100 pounds and had diabetes on the trail by the time I met them. And these three people were hiking and they're having a blast doing the AT, right? So you get people on extreme ends of the spectrums, and then you have wackos like me who are just trying to crank miles and out there, for their own personal reasons. And that's what's so great about the AT culture is people are there, but nobody's there for the exact same reason.
I don't know if you know about this. Another FKT that you set internationally is the Wicklow Round in Ireland. I was actually one of the filmmakers in contention that Columbia reached out to, and ultimately obviously did not get picked, but that would have been a cool experience. Can you talk about the round and how that initially landed on your radar?
Oh, that would have been so cool. We would be having a totally different talk right now, but I guess here we are. Although I do
another time.
One of the guy who's the filmer, his Instagram handle name is Sweaty Steven, which he may have changed that now. Maybe he'd be upset if I said that, but it was one of my favorite Instagram handles of all time. So the round it's about 70 miles. It goes around the Rounds of Wicklow, which is a series of peaks. I want to say around 35. I'm blanking on the exact number right now. In the Wicklow Mountains, it's sort of this like in your face, like punch you in the mouth, fells running. That's kind of classic of the UK in general. So there's, a variety of rounds in Europe, and Columbia basically pitched me on the idea of this bucket list FKT where I could go anywhere I want and set an FKT. And I was in this weird state of like not being a professional athlete, but also being a sponsored athlete, kind of like I had a full-time job and that was a major part of my identity. But I'd like done the AT and it was getting like still pretty new-ish. I'd been running ultras for like 3 or 4 years, but mostly just to kind of push myself and to see where I wanted to go. So this was at this kind of weird transition point for me. And my last name is McConaughy. And I worked a bit at this travel company. And so I've always loved Ireland and really wanted to do something fun there and to spend some time there. And the Wicklow Round is 70 miles. It's like 30 something thousand feet of vert. You basically go point to point. It's mostly off trail. You're just going through the series of these peaks as quickly as you can. And so I did that in 2018 in May. And you're running, through bog, through heather, through all these kinds of tough navigational stuff that makes it just like a really cool adventure because it's part kind of endurance and distance, but then a huge part of it is also navigation and orienteering. So that was something that I really love. And, having sort of with my background is something I really enjoy.
So one of the interesting things about the film is that Ian Keith, who was the previous FKT holder, was out there to help you to recon and answer questions. Is that something that's common in the FKT world where you're helping the next person out, or is that just something that you don't really see that often?
No, it's something that I think is part of the ethos of FKT, but it doesn't always happen. So a big part of FKTs are like, if you have the trail record, you're now the ambassador of that record to some capacity, right? And certain people see themselves as the ambassadors, and other people, want to lead private lives and don't care that much about the next person, or maybe they're a little bit protective of their record. So I think you see a variety of responses. My favorite people are the people who will sort of coach you along. Like Michael Versteeg gave me a bunch of beta about north of the Grand Canyon and what that looks like in winter, which we didn't take to its fullest extent as far as
we'll talk about that.
Yeah,
We'll talk
bit us
about
in the
that.
butt, right? So anytime I do an FKT, I make a pointed effort to at least message the person who owns the record a few times just to get their perspective, let them know I'm doing it, let them know I'm going after their record. Like I set the JMT FKT earlier this year, and Jeff Garmier was like, "Hey dude, just saw you set the record, like heads up, I was actually planning on going for it in a few days." So I this sense of camaraderie and keeping in touch, I think also helps you connect better to those people. Cause I'm like, heck yeah, Jeff, like you rocked the JMT FKT. Sure, you beat me by 12, 13 minutes and that kind of sucks, but like you did still beat me, and that's impressive. And, I'm glad and appreciative of kind of the FKT community trying to help each other out and also push each other.
So that's actually a perfect segue, because I did want to talk to you about the JMT record. What's your philosophy behind, once your record's been broken, especially with the JMT, it was like 25 days later that Jeff went out and got it. Would you go back and redo it? Do you feel like you have a certain sense of peace with your effort? Obviously Jeff kind of had your time as a bit of a standard, which I feel like mentally that you raise the bar and then you raise the bar again.
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah.
So
that gives you a tangible goal.
Right. Yeah.
Where you can push yourself at the end if need be.
Because I know he said he sprinted the last hour to come in under your record, and for you, it's a little bit more arbitrary, kind of the goals you're setting. So what's your thoughts on that? Would you go back and try to do another attempt?
I might have changed my poop break with 5 miles to go until the finish.
Yeah, very fair.
No, I rarely have I done an FKT and then felt like, oh man, I need to do that again. But that has kind of happened with the JMT.
Yeah, because you really didn't have much time to enjoy reflecting on your own journey.
It's such like a premier it's one I've wanted to do for years. It's been on, anybody who looks at FKT it should be on your radar as to me, it's the most competitive, FKT probably. Mm-hmm. At least the one that has the most history and the most kind of bumping of, if you look at the unsupported FKT list, it's very cool to see people taking, an hour, 2 hours, in the course of 1 or 2 seasons off. So for me, that's really motivating and inspiring. So I rarely, getting done with the long trail, Arizona trail, anything like that, I've thought, I want to get back and do this immediately. But the Arizona trail, the John Muir trail has a little different feeling and sense. So I'm hoping to go back next year, but I also still need to figure out what my racing calendar is like next year, because I have a lot of things I want to do next year.
Yeah, that's the struggle for sure. Just on the JMT, a little bit more on that one. You ended up sleeping a lot more than you'd planned, right? Like 4 times as much as you'd originally kind of calculated. It's always interesting. Of course, you can go back and look at all these different time savings and, where you might have made it up. But the sleep part particularly, is that something that you've struggled with before? Is that something where you were surprised by how much sleep you needed? Is that something that's kind of playing into future
I think it
now?
did. It's all, hindsight's always 20/20, or you always tell the narrative you want to tell yourself to feel like you can do better or what have you. But yeah, so my biggest piece of data was the Arizona trail, or the long trail, which is 270 miles. That was 5 days. I slept about 2.5 to 4 hours a night on that. And that was, essentially almost twice the length of time as this was. And then Cocodona was 60 hours, and I slept for 58 minutes in 60 hours at Cocodona. So I was like, okay, somewhere in between. Long trail, I think I overslept a bit, but it's long enough that you can't burn the candle at both ends quite in the same kind of way. JMT to me feels like you can burn the candle at both ends. It's just a little bit longer, hopefully, of a candle wick that you don't crash and burn. So, and I also had the kind of this wacky theory, which I still believe in a bit, but I need to, I don't know if I do it again, where the metabolic changes your body goes through on a multi-day FKT are pretty profound and kind of fun. And so I was like, well, you can mimic some of those changes by longer hiking days. You obviously don't want to push yourself like you're doing an FKT just before you're doing an FKT. But I was like, well, what if I kind of raise my metabolic output significantly before a big effort like this? So there's not this big energy jump where my body has to like, all of a sudden I'm supposed to be eating 6,000, 8,000 calories a day, but all I want to do is eat 4,000. So I had this kind of mixed bag in training, and a few things that went wrong is I was like sleeping 6 to 7 hours a night because I was basically leading guided backpacking trips for 2.5 weeks immediately before the event. So after my last backpacking trip ended, I had 24 hours to get from Mammoth Lakes, buy all my food, get to Little Yosemite Valley, and then start the trail. And so I just went in tired, I think is more my biggest issue. I just wasn't sleeping enough. And I was like pretty stressed out by trying to get my life together after like, 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks of being out in the backcountry. And I think that severely went into to sleep deprivation for me.
So I actually experienced a JMT myself. This happened at a unique period of time. Shortly after the height of COVID, I think we did it in early July of 2020. And that period of time was also, there was a shift in your career path and something that happened with you and relocating from Boston to Seattle. So can you talk about that period and some of the challenges that you went through?
Sure. So it was basically, yeah, I worked at a company for 5 years and then got laid off. And my partner and I were already thinking about moving out west. And then we got laid off and we were like, oh man, and COVID hit, right? Like that's a good combo. We were like, well, I guess it doesn't, like, there's now less things keeping us in Boston. So then that kind of reaffirmed our decision to move out west. And Katie was doing a career switch to go from like a accounting manager to become a registered dietitian. So we knew we had like a few schools that we'd be around. So namely, we'd probably be around Flagstaff, maybe Denver or Seattle. And so we ended up deciding and picking on Seattle. And at the same time, I'd gotten laid off and had severance, and I'd worked a little bit as a running coach just because people had asked me to be their running coach. And then I was like, well, if there's ever a time to like start a business, it's when you have a few months of severance and, you've had some good vibes that have kind of been working out on the side. And so that led to a major kind of shift in how I've been able to kind of utilize my time. And while that happened, I also had just started guiding a backpacking trip a year, essentially, with this guy named Andrew Skirka. And so he needed a program manager and someone to basically be his number two for his business, for like the planning and execution for like adventurous high route backpacking guided trips. And so that allowed me to have a few different kind of revenue streams that all came together right at the right time and allowed me to kind of relook at how I live and make money and all that jazz.
Yeah. Blessing in disguise.
Seriously, I know. Which I don't know if you feel that same. If you had a similar, what was your moment? If you wouldn't mind.
Well, we were managing our. Well, I was part-time managing our family business, which is a retail space in like the West Hollywood, Beverly Hills area. And during the protests, it got damaged and burnt down, and it just kind of forced us to make a shift in that, and it stopped tethering me to that job, to our family business, and it allowed me to roam around a lot more freely. So at the time, it was very, obviously impactful and hard for us, but it turned out to be a blessing. So just going back to you, I'm curious what your line of work was.
I worked for a educational travel company. So I managed basically high school tours that involved language learning and service learning at a company called Education First. So I basically was in tourism. I was making sure we had relationships with NGOs in places like Peru, more so managing and being the amplifier for people that manage relationships with NGOs and really like culturally authentic exchanges, which was the big push of the business. So that allowed me to travel and go to some like cool places during that time. And kind of spark. Yeah, that's part of why I did something like the Wicklow Round is because I just had that interest in travel and other cultures.
So in 2022, and I'm curious about your thoughts on the distinction between a sponsored athlete and a pro athlete. You did switch sponsorship from Columbia to Brooks. I just want to ask you what prompted that sponsored change.
So I had the crew chief of my Pacific Crest Trail effort, Jordo. He is now the trail athlete manager for Brooks.
Ah.
So we've always
was
been
it Jordan Ham?
Jordan Ham. Wow,
Yeah.
nice, Billy. You got some depth there, man. Good work. Yeah, Jordo. So he and I've always been like, oh, how's your work going? Oh, how's running for Columbia? Like we were in these like two peripheral worlds where like we're like, like I run for Columbia, you like are in sports marketing for Brooks, and now you manage trail running in the sports marketing department for Brooks, essentially. And so I was just out for a run with him, and he kind of was like, so we're thinking about getting some more athletes. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And he's like, we kind of want somebody who does FKTs, who maybe they have other skills, like they're a coach who, has, and I was like, Jordan, do you want me to just are you like asking me to run for Brooks? And he's like, well, I did think totally. About it a little bit. And so that kind of finally started off the conversations, which is kind of hilarious because I've sort of been talking with Brooks for like 5 years with some people there. 'Cause I'm a Seattle guy, Brooks is in Seattle. And switching with Brooks has been awesome. They just like a great partnership. I like use their headquarters as my like work from home space every Wednesday. So running for Brooks, I feel like really connected and really sort of empowered and kind of heard through them, which I felt in Columbia. But one of my, lessons as an athlete was in working with Columbia was like, the closer you are to the company, the more fun you're going to get out of the relationship and the better that relationship is going to have, rather than being like initially what I wanted when I was working at EF was mostly just like a paycheck and to be like, yeah, and I love your gear, so that's great. Whereas like Brooks, it feels a little, feels more involved and more connected and maybe more heard, which is sort of like where I'm at professionally too, right? Because I have the time to dedicate and be passionate about that.
And now you have Des Linden as a teammate.
I know, dude. I finally met her. I was geeking out. I think she knew who I was. I'm not totally sure. We were at this trail running summit. First off, Des Linden went to a trail running summit, which like we got to keep her eyes out for how we can convert her to trails. And then we were chatting, and she was a little quiet. And then she was kind of like, oh, so like, how did that like 250-mile race you did go? And I was like, what? who told you this? Or like, did you already know? I didn't ask her that. I tried to play it cool and was like, oh yeah, it was good. Raced pretty well. It's like, yeah. But very cool to have Des Linden and Scott Jurek as a teammate. I got to meet Scott for the first time too, finally.
So let's talk about your racing.
Hit me.
You went to Bandera, and I think you also raced at Javelina for a golden ticket. Is that something that is in your future? Do you want to run Western States?
I would love to run Western States. It would be a ton of fun.
How do you think that would play to your strengths and weaknesses?
Maybe since I can burp now, all gloves are off, man. Like, watch out. No, I don't know. We'll see.
Whole new world.
I do feel like I've consistently underperformed in pretty much every ultra that I've done. Like there's a dinky 50 miler called Lake Warramog 50 miler in like 2018, I think, where I ran like 5:22 out of like a flat 50 miler. And then there've been like a few like Vermont 100. I felt like I raced pretty well. The track 100 that I did, that was just like a solo effort. I was like, there's been a lot of like, that went pretty well. So I feel like I'm still figuring out, and also just haven't raced that much. Like, I'll race like two to four times a year. And that's something I'm putting a little bit more focus on now, I think.
One race you definitely did not underperform at was the Cocodona 250, where you ended up taking the overall win. Can you talk about that day and if you have any 200s in your future?
Yeah, I still am figuring out next year, Billy. So you're gonna have to come back to me, but I'd love to continue to be a part of kind of Cocodona history and to kind of keeping doing 200s. Obviously, I have a knack for it, right? And I have a lot of fun doing it. It's like it is like a mini FKT type atmosphere. You get a really fun crew, people who volunteer there, people who put on the races. Hillary, I'm sure you can attest to this. You just get a lot of awesome, passionate, like weirdos. I don't know if that's your experience, but
yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great community. And I mean, it was really exciting to see you do the Cocodona 250. It's like, oh, is he getting into this world now? But I mean, to go back to what you were saying earlier, it did help you figure out some of the like long-standing burping issues, just like pushing yourself that 10% faster for a lot longer than like 100-miler. Like that's a kind of sweet spot, but also a really tricky distance to race that fast.
Yeah. And funnily enough, I feel like, racing a 200 is more straightforward for me than racing 100 in some ways. I mean, it's really not
very few
objectively,
people ever. Yeah.
Objectively, it's not, but maybe
that.
mentally it feels like that, where maybe I just feel more comfortable, in that kind of multi-day effort. Cause you never really, I never really pushed at Cocodona, but I think had I pushed, I probably would have crashed and burned a bit. Right. So I think there's like such a fun balance there, but I also would love to like have Cocodona be more of a race. Cause I led after like 50 miles and was kind of doing my own thing for a lot of it. So.
And you recently started working with Connor Holt, which is Camille Herron's coach and better
partner.
half. Yeah. How's that relationship?
He's a ton of fun. Been? So I had talked to like a few different coaches, and always, being a coach myself, I'm kind of like, oh, I know what I want. I know what I need. And Connor is like that perfect blend of like, he has a collegiate training background and he's really good at helping. We have the similar philosophies where it's like, focus on fitness, focus on, your workouts and being a really fast runner, and let a lot of the longer distance stuff kind of play into account. So I do think there's one or two flaws there, but I think overall he's like an amazingly suited coach for me, because he's super good at helping me dial in workouts, which is probably my weakest component, especially self-coaching, of being like not objective with yourself. And then he's also very good at helping me not get caught up in like the distance game, where I don't over stress about not doing crazy high volume type stuff that I think is, people are always pushed to do that in ultras, because that, logically makes a lot of sense.
I think I remember reading somewhere that you were coming in at like half the distance of other people that were going after these FKTs. Maybe it was on the Appalachian Trail, but just like overall, it seems like your training volume is lower.
Like you look at Coop's volume, or McKnight's volume, and you're like, wow, is Joe like even really training for this? And I'm like, God dang it, I'm trying hard too here. But I think that keeps me healthy and injury free and having fun, and probably shortchanging my fitness at times. But overall, I just feel like I haven't really gotten injured since. I shouldn't say this ever. I just keep running. I'm not going to say how many years it's been since I've been injured, because I don't want to hurt myself. But yeah, so, I feel like the training aspect is a ton of fun and a process that I enjoy a lot. And Connor's helped give me like a good, no BS, but still kind of quality and caring and empathetic coaching hand that has added a lot of value for me.
Yeah, it's cool to bring other people into that. And actually, I wanted to chat a little bit about your whole support system. It seems like your parents, like your mom's often at your FKTs, your dad, your wife, Katie, like how does that whole element of having your family very intimately involved in these things play into it? Is that a good thing? Is that a hard thing? Because they know you so well and they know when you're really suffering. Like tell us a little bit about your world of people.
I think everybody's parents are very different. And I think given my set of parents, they are good at being supporters for events like this, right? Like, I feel like the advice, you hear this all the time for through hikers, which is like, a woman's like, oh, I'm going to go through hike. And then you get like, oh, are you carrying a gun? Are you going alone? Are you like all these comments that you're like, are you like, can't you just say like, wow, that's very interesting. Like, tell me more about that. Right. You get a lot of like worry. And I think looking back on my upbringing and my family, I think there's a lot of like relaxed naturedness to a lot of people, where it's a little like, yes, we're caring. Yes, we're empathetic, but like you can go and figure this out on your own. And that's actually great for you. Like my mom is always like, oh man, you guys should move to Flagstaff. And then we'd be like, Mom, but then we wouldn't live near you. And she's like, no, you guys would do so great there. Or you'd love this. Like she's always thinking really deeply about kind of our experiences and my experiences, and having Katie there is equally, nice and something we've grown through. We, started dating when we were like 19. We've been together for like 13, 12 years now. So, Katie does an amazing job at helping support me and also kind of keeping me in check a little bit, because it's really easy to want to say yes to everything and go everywhere. But I think it's a really good approach to look critically at everything that you're doing and to seriously plan for them, right? Like Katie's a CPA, where I was an English major. So when it comes to like spreadsheets and planning, like the spreadsheet is a learned skill of mine, not like an inherent skill of mine, right? So it's really cool to have, friends and family. And then you have somebody like Whit that you talked about. Whit reached out to me as like an athlete. He's like, hey, I want you to coach me for these multi-day events. And then that just turned into a really great friendship. And he's somebody who I've learned a lot from, and who is like one of the most caring and empathetic people. So I'm always going to try to hustle and get him or Katie or my family or anybody who's close to me involved on these types of things, as long as I feel like it's not kind of burdening them unnecessarily.
Did I read somewhere that your wife, Katie, is dealing with Crohn's? And if so, did that play any part in her decision to go from a CPA accounting to, I think she's studying nutrition at UW?
Exactly. Yeah. She'll be an RD. Yeah. So she's awesome. She needed to take 13 prerequisites to go from a, accounting major to science person. So she took 13 credits over COVID, 13 classes, not credits, sorry. She took 13 classes, online classes over COVID, and then started at University of Washington. And yeah, Crohn's has kind of influenced her there. Like the interesting, maybe broader lesson for anybody who's listening is like, she'd had Crohn's, and I don't think she'd very briefly met with a dietitian a few times in a specialized program over multiple years. And it's very common that people who have Crohn's need to get a surgery. And she got that surgery. And then she finally started really talking with a registered dietitian who gave her very contradictory advice to what she'd gotten previously regarding diet. And so that kind of got her thinking a little bit more seriously about, diet and how our medical system approaches that. So that's been hugely influential for her. But I think she also just likes the overall kind of aspect and discipline, and something that's a little bit more human focused and a little bit more positive, maybe like change focused on like positive change, which accounting kind of can feel a little bit suffocating at times.
Yeah. I mean, so it's interesting. My sister has Crohn's disease, and I have celiac disease. So I know a little bit about that world. And it must be interesting for you, because she's got all this knowledge of nutrition and how much that affects our bodies, because it's huge. How has that played into your nutrition? Has that changed any of your nutrition for these FKTs? Or are you just kind of like the nacho and beer and pizza crowd?
The Carl Meltzer approach.
Yeah.
No, I'd say, well, it's actually super cool. We're doing I wrapped all these. I didn't wrap. I'm giving myself more credit for that one. Basically, there's this really awesome researcher named Herman Poncer, if you know who he is. He made a book called Burn, and his whole thing is sort of like re-examining how we look at like caloric expenditure from like a performance lens, but also from a lifestyle lens and from a like anthropological lens. So like, how did humans develop with nutrition, and what were they doing? And his big finding was that people who live in hunter-gatherer communities, when you account for just the difference in body type and all those other things, they spend the same amount of calories as a typical American who follows like a standard American diet and has minimal to no exercise. So basically, someone who sits in an office all day is using the same amount of calories as somebody who lives in a hunter-gatherer setting in Africa. And the interesting thing there was like, oh, how does this relate to a whole variety of things? But from an ultra endurance perspective, it's like, oh, is there a certain amount of metabolic output that, people generally are able to sustain before they start kind of deteriorating or they push too hard? So Katie was able to kind of get in a study with this guy. And so I've taken data from the Arizona Trail, from Cocodona, and then wrapped a few other people who are racing Cocodona into this study. So Katie is helping kind of put together some research in on the study that they're doing. And so to trickle down and to answer your question very simply, yes, Katie has a big, influence on diet, mostly because I kind of follow her diet. but also because she has a lot of kind of insight and knowledge on, carbohydrate focus, nutrition, kind of like nutrition basics for ultras and all that jazz.
Part of the support system, it's hard to, we'd be remiss in not bringing up the reason why we can follow you on so many of your journey is Michael Dills and Jack Murphy, the two filmmakers behind Racing Arizona, which we'll touch upon in a second. Just talk about your dynamic and your relationship. I feel like it's almost impossible to talk about your thru hiking and your racing career without talking about Dills and Jack Murphy factored into the adventures.
Yeah, that they've just kind of I keep stringing them along like one year after another, and they haven't dropped off the face of the earth yet from too many ridiculous experiences. But I mean, it all kind of started when I was doing the PCT back in the day. So Jordo, who we talked about earlier, he was my crew chief. And so I kind of announced at Boston College that I was going to run the PCT. And then Jordo was like, oh, I'll be your crew chief because I have that summer. And so Dills was his best friend from high school who also went to BC. And there's this classic ultimate Frisbee cross country, like all the cool kids hang out with each other and spend time with each other dynamic. So I'd known Dills pretty well through Jordo and through parties and all this jazz. And Jordo and I were like, oh man, wouldn't it be cool if we film this, especially if we're trying to raise, if for a cause. And we asked Dills and he said yes. So now we have Jordo, Dills, and me. And we're like, well, we need one other. We need if there's a support crew of two, like Jordo and Dills are going to get sick of each other at some point. So we need to rope one more person to giving up 2 months of their whole summer to go up the entire, West Coast. And Jack Murphy was one of their best friends, also from high school in Buffalo. So these three guys all went to high school together in Buffalo and just found their way on the Run for Colin adventure. And then since then, I mean, that's been like an inseparable bond that, makes you feel intimately connected, even though, Dills has lived in, mostly Buffalo, a little bit in Boston. So it's not like we see each other all the time, but we're, constantly in talks. I'm always stoked whenever I'm doing anything. If I'm like, Dills, are we making a documentary on what can we do for the JNT for the long trail? He's like, you just give me footage or I'll be there or whatever. We'll make it work and make some really cool work out of it. And Jack's been a lot of fun too, because he has a whole artistic side, musical side to him. So a lot of the music from any of the documentaries we've made has been original productions by him, which is just pretty rad.
Yeah, it's really cool to see play out on these productions. And, one of the cooler projects that I followed on, I think it was when you were doing the AZT in 2021 is that Michael was producing these daily, it was kind of like vlogs, but it was also, it wasn't shot on GoPro. It was from his camera, his really nice camera. And he was providing these daily updates, I think the following day, which was super ambitious and super cool to follow along that way. So that's when the AZT was first on my radar and just got to see some of the behind the scenes of what you endured and went through. And I love this line by Dills. He said it was your stubborn optimism and goofy attitude that was your real strength. So let's unpack the AZT adventure, which is now fully out on film as a long feature length production.
It was pretty rad. That's a big question again, but so the Arizona Trail is 800 miles. I did it in April 2021, March to April 2021, and I averaged about 60 miles a day. Dills agreed to film it along with Jack, and then I also managed to get our good friend Whit to offer his van as the official crew vehicle. My mom came down, Katie came down. Katie was really the kind of crew chief and was pulling all the logistical strings. And then our dog Crash was there just to make sure people had fun. And we realized how much our Australian Shepherd hates desert. But, he did okay under the shade of the car. So Dills had a super ambitious goal where he felt like, you talk about me being like, oh, you want to kind of come back out there and go after these FKTs that you lost or feel like you could do better on. I think Dills felt a little bit the same way about the Pacific Crest Trail, where he's like, there's so much I could have done if I had known going into the PCT what I could produce. And so I think he felt like he probably might even describe it as like a chip on his shoulder for the Arizona Trail, where he was like, you know, a lot of what people have found most interesting about these documentaries we've made have been what the crew's doing and what happens behind the scenes rather than what the actual runner is doing, which I'm sure you two can probably attest to that. Like the funniest scenes in ultras are like people eating at food stations or somebody popping blisters or like, you know, somebody's like parent or family member who's there just describing the situation. And so Dills really wanted to capture what the crew experienced. And so that was the whole goal for the vlog, was he wanted to give a real voice to what the crew was experiencing and then save this longer form documentary. So it's a 45-minute documentary. I don't know how he did it because he was up until like 2 or 3 a.m. every night editing. And like I'd get off trail around 11 to 12. I'd eat for an hour and then go to bed at 1. And then he would spend 12 to, he'd like capture just enough footage of me in camp, go off, hunker down, spend 2 hours, offloading footage, editing footage, creating a storyline. Like those videos have great storylines. They're not just like, A, B, C, D. It's like they're narratives. And so I don't know how he pulled that one off, but he did. And so now this is kind of the fuller form doc that's meant to sort of encapsulate like the running side of it and the FKT side of it.
Well, it's really cool to see both. And I've been involved in the 200-mile world for a few years now, and it really does take a village of people to get you across the finish line for any of these long efforts. So I think it is important to highlight that because, like you're out there doing your thing, but there's this whole moving network of people and logistics and all that to make it possible for you to keep going, especially for the Arizona Trail. When you ran into some challenges, I feel like it really was a team effort on this one.
Well, I was talking with Katie about this coming out, and she was like, "Oh, it's great! Like you're going to be out there, like like setting the record and doing all that jazz, and like me and Whit are going to look like sleep deprived and horrible. Like that's our, like,
yeah,
we just look like that, right? Like that's our character impression. People leave is like, oh, Whit looks sleep deprived. Katie looks sleep deprived. Like they must be having a rough day, but you don't really experience or see that. So I really appreciate, and it's what's fun having Dills and Jack on the ground is, they know how to capture that with a lens and not, hope that those moments bubble through, which will happen organically, but you kind of need an eye for that type of stuff.
You need to anticipate that moment happening, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The camera needs to be on when Dills is breaking down that he lost his drone and he's spending like a whole half day instead of supporting me trying to figure out where a drone landed based off of a GPX ping that was like a few hundred feet away. So,
oh my God. Billy and I have both felt that pain, so we empathize.
I can imagine. I'm sure like we could talk videography with you two forever, I'd imagine, because it's just really cool. And I think a unique thing probably about filming these types of efforts.
Oh yeah. It's a whole adventure, just getting to the story,
That'll be my turn to like interview the interviewer. Like what cinematically or video from a videographer's perspective, what was the most like challenging or impressive thing that you noticed that Jack or Dills or that anyone else did that the common person watching the documentary might not pick up on or appreciate?
Well, honestly, it was just the daily vlogs. I just know the amount of time it takes to not only upload it, but to transcode it and to have it processed behind the scenes and just to merely get it set up to edit. And like you said, there were narratives. It wasn't just slapped together footage from, day 1 to day 2. It was thoughtful. It was really impressive to follow along. I was like watching and following your adventure going, damn, this is good stuff.
All being done from a Sprinter van on the side of the road as you're driving to the next spot, right?
With an amplified 4G, 5G signal.
It was also
like any kind of
It was also impressive just seeing how impressive the technology has gotten. Over the course of 2014 to now, when you were holding shaky GoPros to now internally stabilized, and just seeing the quality of that evolve in your time span of running these through hikes, it's really
thank
impressive.
You, Billy. Well, that's what's so funny. Dills is like, you're so much better with the camera than you used to be. I was like, it's the technology. It's not me. I've always been this good.
Well, okay. And speaking of kind of footage from along the way, Whit was a big part of your Arizona trail, and he paced you for quite a bit of it seemed like, especially when shit hit the fan, and you got into some pretty snowy conditions on the North Rim. And, having been on the other side of it a lot, I could appreciate that Whit was still filming, even when you guys are both post-holing up to your knees and very much in the thick of it, and like there was some war wounds, there's a lot of blood. Like post-holing after a while is an extremely painful and extremely dangerous thing because you could like break an ankle at any time. So yeah, just talk about how kind of that bond between you guys and how he kind of supported you when things got really real out there, and just like that whole adventure side of
and how close were you to actually tapping out?
I mean, I did tap out. I literally quit. Yeah.
Or trying to.
We got out of the trail. I was like, okay, my last go is snowshoe. Because the thing I don't think the film really conveys is how much time we spent post-holing. Like we spent a lot of time. Like it was like probably
27 miles, right?
It was
or longer.
Well, it was 27 miles once we met the crew. So we met, we basically had to, we got to the North Rim, we celebrated because on our phones, Gaia has a layer, like a snow layer, and that snow layer showed no snow. We could have looked over 10 feet to our right and known that was not true. But we were like, yeah, we did it. And then that was probably at like 1 o'clock or 12. We spent the next like 5-ish hours post-holing. And then I got to a point where I was like, this feels objectively unsafe. We don't have we have like minimal cold weather gear and we can be out for a night, but it's putting it's putting the crew in danger. And so we need to kind of reevaluate our plan. So then I went and slept for a little bit. We got off trail and slept near the entrance station to the North Rim, and the crew met us. We got food. We had snowshoes in case this would happen. But the snowshoes just didn't gain any traction and weren't wide enough, or the snow was just that rotten that it didn't really do anything. So then I spent another 2 hours about trying and hoping that the snowshoe idea would work. And then I'm like, okay, our plan A, B, C have all failed. We can't keep running forward because there's too much snow. We can't post-hole because we're averaging a little over a mile an hour. And tomorrow we have to go through a 27-mile stretch. And if all of 27 miles of that is snow, which based on elevation, at least 20 miles of it should be, then we're screwed, and the snowshoes don't work. And so with those kind of three things, I, as the trip leader, was like, this is when you just call the trip and say, hey guys, we can't do anything on this, and this is out of our control, but we've given it one hell of a go. And then my crew, we went and slept an entire night. I got 8 hours of sleep. And then everybody in the crew was I think couldn't believe it. And I was very affirmative I was like, this is I've been a trip leader before, and this is when you make the call and you don't put yourself at risk. And then people pushed me on it that next morning. And I was like, at the very least, you're right. We can get out and see what the conditions are like in the morning. Michaela was there. She's the previous FKT holder on a variety of trails, Colorado Trail and Long Trail, and a Triple Crown through hiker. Whit was there. So we felt like we kind of had a tag team of people who would help break trail, or at the very least carry enough equipment that it felt safe to do. And then, then we took the next 14 hours, 15 hours of post-holing to finally get through it all.
I got to ask you about the food. That's my favorite topic.
His trail name is Bourdain, just so you know. So.
Yeah, trail name of Bourdain. 8,000 calories per day. Have you figured out after all these adventures what works best and what doesn't?
Mostly.
So give us some examples.
Some examples would be, you're going to get me to talk to you. Like to get me going on rambles, Billy. So generally, the way I look at it, basics, it's try to get as carb focused as you can. Have more protein than you think you're going to need, because any ultra, diet doesn't really have any protein in it. And you need to eat more calories than you think you need. So when it came to the Arizona Trail, I was eating any and everything. I had a lot of Pro Bar gummies. I always find it easiest to have sports nutrition type foods for a good part of my nutrition. So I had Pro Bar gummies, We had a variety of other types of bars and other things. I used a little bit of drink mix. I used a lot of Martin too, because we had access to Martin and could make that happen. And then I also had, whenever I was getting a chance, I would stuff myself with as much food as possible, so they'd buy a burger, bring me a burger and fries, and I'd huff that. And that would be like the first third of my dinner or the first half of my dinner. So I was trying to kind of follow that classic, 200 to 350 calories an hour, with major stuff sessions along the way where I'd try to be getting, 500, 1,000 calories at lunch, because 8,000 calories in a day, you need to have a few meals that are like 2,000 plus calories at one time. Otherwise, you're just going to have a really hard time getting to that number.
That is a skill. That is a serious skill to be able to get that much food in.
Especially if you can't burp,
So it's a whole new world now, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh my God, you're gonna be unstoppable.
I need to do something big like that while I can burp, and then I'll say a whole new world. So I'm hoping, crossing my fingers.
2023.
Well, all of this and more is now available for free on YouTube. My God, what a bargain. All this free content. Racing Arizona on Pilot Field's YouTube page. Pilot Field. I wonder where that came from. Does that have anything to do with the Honda Pilot that he drives?
I wish, aka carne asada. I can't believe you notice too much, Billy. I'm just going to be suspicious if you know too many details. No, it has to do. It has to do something in Buffalo that I'm blanking on what it is. I'll get back to you on that one. You can put that in the show notes. All right. For the name of Pilot Field.
In the meantime, we have a couple of Patreon questions to end on. From Emma Wagner. Did he experience any freak storms or animal encounters in all your, adventures? She just kind of left it open-ended.
She's given me a wide scope.
I don't know.
Yeah, I've seen
specify.
Variety
or
of
maybe specifically on the AZT. I don't know.
Maybe we'll just do the brief. The brief encapsulation is you see a lot more bears and other weird wildlife when you're out at 3 a.m. than you would at other times. So on the Arizona Trail, it was actually pretty good. I saw a few rattlesnakes but no bears. And I did get hit with like a freak storm where it like rained on us by Wrightson. So in kind of southern Arizona, not rained, it snowed on us. So we got like 2 inches, 3 inches of snow up at higher elevations. And it hailed on day one. Yeah, I was expecting southern Arizona to be like hot and like a death march. And instead it was like cold and wet and kind of uncomfortable in that angle.
Right back to your Seattle roots, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Everywhere I go, I make it rain, so.
From a timing perspective, would you do anything different? Would you maybe move it closer to the middle or end of April to avoid the snow if you were to do it all over again?
I think you just want to do it in October, because had I gone earlier or later, you would have still gotten snow. What hurt me in the failure in my research was that a lot of other people who'd done FKTs had done it around this time. And I was right at that temperature change where all the snow was rotten, because it was getting to like, just cold enough to freeze and then just warm enough to melt. So everything, basically like you had a thin crust layer that was just like, you were going to punch through it every time, but you still had like, 14 to 28 inches of snow underneath you. So long story short, probably like a fall attempt would be better.
Plus the North Rim access by car is limited, right?
Yeah, it closed. I don't remember when it opens. It was closed when we were there. So they could only get into the to the entrance station.
I have a question here from Sheila Boyle. I'm curious if on his FKTs, he has people stopping him to ask what he's doing or people slowing him down. And how does he manage that graciously? Spending a lot of time in Vermont and hiking the long trail, I could see how it could really slow you down. Or perhaps it could do the opposite and give you energy.
Yeah, you get a little bit of both. I always if anybody's there, I will happily talk to you. We met this guy named Bear Meat. He, what is Bear Meat? I think Bear Meat had hiked the AT. And he just kind of was a travel nurse and was in Flagstaff and saw what was going on and came out for like a day and a half. And he went through, we were going right around Eldon and there was a bit of snow there. And so he was just this big boost to energy for the entire crew of this fun kind of chill guy who kind of helped us cover some miles and was super interested in everything we were doing. So there's, some really fun friendships and people you meet. Another guy is Ryan Lay, who's now a great friend of mine. He crewed me at Javelina, and he was doing it. He's a pro skateboarder, and we just like him and Whit became like fast friends. And so you meet some cool people that you want to talk to and be with. On something like the Arizona Trail, my whole crew was there, so they would probably do a little bit more of the, lip service to people, and if people wanted to chat, I would probably bounce off and they would hang around for another 20, 30 minutes. But to me, I'd always want to stop and talk if somebody was kind enough to express curiosity in what we were doing.
I have a couple more questions here from Mark Griffith. This might be a little open-ended. Maybe you addressed it somewhat, but what enables him to, quote, be fast? Is it a sufficient stride? Is it his speed? Is it his relentless forward motion? Is it going longer than anyone else?
Yeah, my simplest answer to that would be the better your fitness is, the less stressful it is to run for 12 hours or 14 hours or 18 hours, which if you want to do something like the Arizona Trail, you just need to be time on feet, in that 16 through 18, maybe 19 range. And you also need to be moving fast when you're moving, right? So it's a combination of endurance plus the ability to endure, or fitness plus the ability to endure.
And the second part of his question is, how does he enjoy guiding with Skirka and crew? What does he enjoy and or learn from the experience?
I think a different sense of like adventure. Like I'm actually really stoked to do more stuff like the Wicklow Round at some point, and to do more high route type stuff that's more of a route than a trail. And you also learn a certain sense of sort of like empathy and compassion, because you're working with people who are, trying to push themselves as backpackers in their own right. So I feel like working with Andrew has allowed for that kind of like a different perspective. And then also Andrew has helped professionalize and be like a business mentor for me, in terms of my coaching business and just working professionally in a kind of creative career space.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, with the whole guiding part to your work and everything you do you find like those are beneficial miles, like having that time on feet? Or do you find that is just kind of fatigue on the legs and the body? And also, like, I've done some guiding myself. You're kind of on the whole time. So it's like a little bit of physical and mental, fatigue. So, on one sense, like dream job, you get to be out training in the mountains all day. But on the other hand, you feel like sometimes it's almost harder for you to recover or to properly train at the speed that you'd want.
Yeah, definitely that latter where I think they aren't totally compatible, but you can be like, I'll often, when everybody goes to sleep, I'll go knock off like an 8-hour or 8-mile trail run, and still get in bed by 10:30 and get 8 hours of sleep. So basically I've been able to make it work, from that sense. But yeah, there's definitely a mental anxiety component to it. The actual hiking, you're not really working in any kind of aerobic zone often. So, you aren't really getting training benefit other than, I think it's great as far as muscular resilience and tendon resilience and strength.
Okay. String Bean, Joe McConaughy, that's all we have. We can follow you on Instagram, String Bean Coaching. I believe you're accepting new clients right now.
I am, sir.
Okay. We'll link all that in the show notes. And of course, the latest film, Racing Arizona, 45-minute film, all about the AZT, FKT, ran last year in 2021. Joe McConaughy, it was a pleasure chatting with you ever since we saw Run for Colin and how much that inspired me personally and how much it touched me to meeting you and Dills in person in 2017 in Lake Sonoma. And it's just been fun to follow your career. So keep doing what you're doing, man.
Just keep going up and up. And you too. I'm equally impressed by all that you guys put on. So thank you for being so great with, I think there's not really many people like Billy Yang making docs. So I appreciate all the work you've done.